Hi everyone. Very excited to be bringing you this webinar, which has come about by a client of ours having an issue and me noticing some regular newspaper reporting about Medicare fraud as well. So firstly, Liza and I are both here on the land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and I recognise and respect elders past, present and emerging. And one of the really exciting things about these webinars is that people come in from all over Australia. So I'm very happy to hear from you in the chat bar if you're from another land in Australia, and love to hear which traditional lands you're joining us from. While you do that, we are professional services people, and you would be disappointed if we didn't start with a disclaimer of some kind. So this is the Nexia disclaimer, and I've added you legal to it, to the relevant parts. We're not going to be giving specific advice in this webinar, but we are going to be giving you a general idea about how to prevent medical practice fraud in your practice. One thing we find with doctors is that they are just such beautiful, trusting people that they don't necessarily understand that these sorts of issues can be avoided by doing some simple things. And so that's why we wanted to help support our community by giving you some ideas in this webinar. So these are the specific things that we're going to be speaking to. We're going to make sure that you're crystal clear on the actions that you need to take to protect your medical practice from fraud, have a clear and simple delegation process within your practice so that you're confident that you're adequately protected, understand the key signs and behaviours to look for employee fraud, and also to take back control of a very real and very critical financial issue in your practice. And also, what we also find is that some doctors feel like they have to do everything themselves. You don't have to do that, but then we'll show you how that can be possible too. And then we also want you to feel empowered to know that your practice is protected. So next step is you're going to be, at the end of this webinar, you'll be on the front foot in understanding the steps you need to take so that your practice is in the best place to avoid an employee taking advantage of your practice. I think I'm going to let you introduce yourself first, Eliza. Very big welcome to my guest, Eliza Sims from Nexia Edwards Marshall.
Thank you, Sarah. So, as Sarah's mentioned, my name's Eliza Sims from Nexia Edwards Marshall. We're a mid-tier accounting firm based in Adelaide, but we also have a Northern Territory office directly affiliated with us, and we're a part of a wider Nexia network, which is both Australia, New Zealand and global. So a bit about me. I am an accountant, first and foremost. I have a bit of a health background, and so this really has piqued my keen interest in the health aspect and financial management and healthcare. So I head up the health services team here at Nexia Edwards Marshall, and really excited to be working with Sarah and having a chat with you today about this really important topic.
Awesome. For those of you who haven't been to one of my webinars before, my name's Sarah Bartholomew. I run a commercial law firm that protects doctors, specifically their practice, their patients, their people and their profits, because I come from a medical family and I really care about protecting medical doctors. I've written a book called Growing a Medical Practice from Frustration to a High Performance Business, and in the last 24 hours or so, I've been playing around with writing another book about directors' duties for doctors, because one thing I've noticed with all the talk about payroll tax is people in chat groups saying things like, I'm just going to wind up my business and start another one. And so understanding the corporate structures that you've got and the duties that apply to them is also really important. I'm not sure that there's any literature out there on that topic. So watch this space on that one. All right. We've created something called the 5-step preventative protocol that medical practices can put in place to prevent medical practice fraud. So these are the 5 steps that you must take to protect your practice from medical practice fraud, to make sure it's in the best possible position. And Eliza's going to start with step 1, which is probably the most interesting human side of this session, I think, isn't it? Tell us about the motivating factors for medical practice fraud to start with.
Thanks, Sarah. So naturally, as an accountant, I'm going to have a bit more of a financial spin on this, more so than the Medicare fraud side. But I think really the principles are going to really flow through for both aspects. So what we deem and term often is the fraud triangle. And this is almost the perfect storm, say, for the motivating factors for fraud to occur. So there are, as you can see, the 3 along here, and I'll touch on each of these briefly and kind of the things that you can look at to reduce and what you can consider as why things happen and kind of some symptoms to look out for. So first off, I'll start off with opportunity. And this one here is the one that practices can actually look to reduce yourselves. You can't change rationalisation for people. You can't necessarily change financial pressures in certain people's lives. So it is to be mindful of them, to be aware of them, but opportunity is really the one that you have the most control over. So opportunity is caused by a multitude of things, but the key ones here are things such as lack of controls, lack of oversight, and collusion. So lack of controls in the first place can be things such as not having the right approvals or having the steps in place that who can approve items over a certain expenditure, or who can approve putting new people in systems, new employees, that sort of thing. Oversight. Understand, as medical professionals, you are incredibly busy. So, you're trusting the people, as Sarah said, and you're very trusting to run your business. And you always hope for the best, and it's nice to imagine the best in people, but you do need to make sure you are considering oversight into the business with this as well. Oversight reduces that risk and opportunity for people to let things fly under the radar. And finally, collusion. It is unfortunate, but not necessarily always done by one person. If you've got a couple of people who are able to work together to cover up various aspects of the business, or work together to put in, this may be under the controls, you end up doing having the wrong 2 people in this space. Collusion does make this a lot easier for people to conduct fraud. Now, you kind of think the financial pressure is a key reason why fraud does occur. So, as I mentioned here, this is the why. There are a few items, and there can be, again, a multitude of reasons people commit fraud, but one of the first ones really is personal financial stress. If people are in a position where they're under financial pressure, and as we know, this is even more so in the current environment, people are under the rising cost of living. People can be led to do really interesting things that they never thought they would do when they're under financial pressure. Things that can also put people under financial pressure are things such as addiction. Addiction, as we know, is disease. People really need to fuel this, and they have need the means of doing so. If they don't have the funds under their own earning capacity to do so, this may open up the door for them to be able to conduct fraud. And another one here is actually more about a symptom to look at for people's lifestyle. And this is something you can consider where people maybe change in their habits and how they're conducting themselves. Maybe they're turning up in a brand new car and there's no real reason in this current environment that they would. You don't want to have the very sceptical and always that mindset, but it is something to be aware of. So that kind of change in behaviours and lifestyle that people have. We really encourage, from our perspective, to have a really open policy. So if people are in the likes of financial stress, they feel comfortable being able to come to you, that you might be able to work something out that doesn't push them to the perspective of conducting fraud. An open conversation, you might be able to arrange something with them and just be aware of what stresses that they are facing and offer some comfort. Finally, this is the rationalisation side, why people do fraud and how they rationalise it. themselves. People don't go out in the first instance thinking they're going to commit fraud, but really several factors can contribute to people ending up doing such a thing. So the first one we say here is workplace culture. If this is a bit of a negative culture, people can have that the attitude of, I deserve this. This isn't nice. I'm not appreciated here. I'm going to take a bit extra to really warrant what I'm doing. That's really important. That's something that you can look to address and really make sure there's really positive workplace culture, as I mentioned before, about the open door policy, having good conversations, but also making sure people feel respected. People don't want to do the wrong thing by people that they've got a really good relationship with. The next one is overtime. As we all know, it's a really busy environment. It's hard to find staff at the moment. Everyone typically is short-staffed. So if people are doing overtime, sometimes they can justify to themselves that, I've done this overtime. I've not been paid for it. I deserve, this financial gain that I'm taking out of this. Really important justification factor here. Again, this really ties in closely with the workplace culture. If you're fostering a positive environment, recognising in various ways, not necessarily financially, but appreciation for the work and overtime people are putting in, it's a really helpful way to try and mitigate that factor. Another one here is borrowing. People can often start fraud by thinking, I'm just borrowing, I will bring this back, I will pay this back. But things get ahead of people, and even so, just borrowing in its own right and putting it back, that is still taking away from the business. It's still conducting fraud. But people can get really ahead of themselves, and once the snowball starts going down the hill, it's difficult, and that borrowing becomes more and more, and suddenly they're borrowing peach paper, is what we say. So, as I mentioned, there are here rationalisations, there's reasons that this is happening, which you can look to mitigate certain things under this, such as the positive culture. But the biggest thing that you as a practice can really look to do and reduce is the opportunity. Put in place controls. This is sign-offs. As I mentioned, you're really busy. The oversight can be a hard thing, but purchases over certain amounts, new suppliers, anything like that, make sure that you are cross-checking from this perspective that it is actually reasonable and a relevant one. We always say this, and I know Sarah will definitely reiterate this, leverage the experts. Know what people can, a fresh pair of eyes can be a really good chance for people to come in and see what might be happening. With the opportunity as well, sorry I didn't mention before, is it's a really key behaviour where people are not taking leave. People are spending a long time and there's no one ever coming in and checking what they're doing. This can really open up the door for that opportunity, really, to conduct fraud because no one's ever cross-checking what's happening and there's no real reason you're going to be discovered. That then ties into my leveraging an expert. We often say to people, whether it's a quarterly review or a biannual review of the from the accounting perspective, leverage an accountant, leverage actually an external bookkeeper who has they're not incentivized to do this. They're going to look at this from a fresh pair of eyes and say, these transactions might look odd, there might be nothing behind it, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Overcomplicated transactions can be a really key indicator from our perspective of when people are conducting fraud. We've had this exact example from a client, and it's unfortunate, and it was they had an internal bookkeeper, and we never understood that come year end, but they were always not wanting to spend the money to review it. And there were really complicated transactions that was really difficult for us to follow. Owner's view was to just push through the accounts. We've got the information there. This is what we need to prepare. But when we finally did really put our foot down and said we need to just have a review of this, we uncovered fraud. We had one of our bookkeepers go out and say there are some really odd transactions, overcomplicating, which then makes it visually hard to follow. Having that fresh pair of eyes, we were able to help remedy this for the client. So really make sure you are leveraging an expert for any areas that you can't really manage yourself. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Eliza. That was an awesome start and really covered probably all of our 5 steps, but I'll still go through them. Step 2, which Eliza did talk about, is your culture. So as a director or officer, which would cover medical practice owners as doctors and also practice managers as executives, you are 100% responsible for the culture of your practice. And how to influence a culture of compliance will mean that you're implementing some really strong internal controls. So having a system of checks and balances, which does help reduce your risk, and can also what you can also do in that internal framework is split duties between people. So not have the same person doing all of the tasks and owning the whole chain. And as Eliza says, people can avoid going on leave if they are engaged in this sort of conduct. And I've got a cousin who works at a big bank, and she's required to go on leave once a year for one whole week and have absolutely no email contact or no contact with anyone from the office. And that's one way that the bank manages that risk, so that it's that compliance culture is built into their leave structure and the understanding of the human behaviour. When you're hiring people, make it your practice to do background checks. I'm in the process of hiring a new CEO for a not-for-profit that I chair, and we do, as a matter of course, working with children checks. We do the national police checks. So having those checks in place can help save a lot of headaches in the future. We once had a client who had hired someone unbeknownst to them who had previously been convicted of murder and done time, and they just had never done the checks. And they were actually fine as an employee, but when they found this out, it was a big shock to them. So you can make decisions with your eyes open if you do the checks in the first place. Encourage employees to report any suspicious activity they see. So maybe having a whistleblower policy in place will help with that, and making sure that people know that if they do report people within the organisation, it's going to be kept confidential, and that they understand what the reporting line is to do that as well. Because we've seen matters where it's the practice manager who is the person who is either banking cash in their own account, or just kind of having their way with the petty cash without using the proper processes. And if people might feel afraid to report that sort of conduct of the practice manager who they report to, but having the clear processes in place and that compliance culture can help you. Monitoring employee behaviour, keeping an eye on everyone and knowing what people are up to when they're working is important. It might include you reviewing financial statements and bank accounts and other financial records, which some doctors just leave to other people rather than having their own oversight on it. And also enforcing the consequences. So people knowing what's going to happen if things are discovered that maybe are a bit untoward. It might hopefully constitutes serious misconduct and immediate termination, but people knowing that and reporting it to law enforcement as well, and people knowing that in advance can help to moderate people's behaviour, hopefully. Delegate mindfully. Eliza talked about that, and including your professional advisors as part of your delegation, or also getting advice on how to delegate within your specific practice structure, because we know that all practices are different in one way or another. So a quick recap, the first 3 steps are: we need to understand the motivating factors, we need to cultivate your culture of compliance, and to delegate mindfully. Step 4 is train your team. Make sure you're providing your employees with education on your policies and procedures, and that fits into the compliance culture as well, including the importance of maintaining integrity, having that as an important part of your culture and values, and making sure that avoiding fraudulent behaviour is important to you, and that's expressed in your practice culture as well, and training the team regularly on this. Like we want you to train people regularly on cybersecurity. This is another thing to include in your training suite of things on your list to do, which I know is never ending, but this is a really important aspect of your practice. Encouraging employees to report any suspicious activity as well, which I mentioned earlier in the culture of compliance, but that can be reinforced in the training. Leverage an expert. Eliza mentioned that, but what leveraging an expert does do is it brings new ideas, best practice, and accountability to you as a practice manager or leader. There's already new ideas in your head right now that you wouldn't have in your head if you hadn't made the time to come along to this webinar. So we are very grateful that you did. We wanted to make it pretty short, sharp and sweet. We also wanted to make sure that you had some time for questions. So the 5 steps are: understand the motivating factors, cultivate your culture, delegate mindfully, train your team, and leverage an expert as 5. Got some time for questions now. I'm going to stop sharing, I think, for the moment so that I can see the chat bar. Also done a strange thing where it's come up here instead of coming down. All right. Do we have any questions? Nothing so far in the chat bar or the Q&A. What's been the most useful thing that we've talked about today that you thought you might be able to implement immediately in your practice? I'm always so interested, Eliza, in the discussion about the motivating factors. And one of the newspaper articles I read recently was about a Medicare fraud. And it was exactly what you were talking about. This particular person was turning up to the office with designer handbags and just really living the high life, I think, with the money that she was taking from Medicare. So that is a really important one, and really, I guess, asking those curious questions about, I noticed this, like, what made you so interested in buying a Louis Vuitton handbag? Or I don't know how you ask the question. It's not really legal, I suppose. It's more management.
I think it's really important what you're saying there, Sarah, as well, with the importance of having that culture. First of all, being able to identify when you've got change in behaviours, but it's also being able to have that open policy that you can kind of have conversations with people that it's not odd to be having conversations about people's lives, so it doesn't seem, you never want to be prying, you don't want to be the one who, you don't want to be glass half empty mindset and thinking the worst of everyone. It's not what we're trying to do with this webinar and say about people, but it's just having an awareness of it and being able to have that open policy and open conversation that doesn't kill the staff culture either, that isn't feeling inventory or anything.
Yeah, so I've just got a message that the chat is disabled, but there's a few things coming on the Q&A. So please use that, not the chat. Sorry about that. All these tech issues today that we don't usually have. Michaela says, are there certain questions that new employees who might be inclined to committing fraud may ask others in senior roles, which can tip others in the management team off? Do you know, I've got an example. I'm going to let Eliza open that, but I remember as an employee, I worked somewhere and there was somebody who was employed by the safety team, and as part of their role was given a work credit card, and on their first day went over to the pub across the road and just maxed it out on the pokies. So I would have thought that the particular manager that hired this person would have known the questions that might have tipped them off in the hiring process, but maybe that just shows how difficult it was. It was like safety and compliance section of this big organisation.
It is ridiculous. So with going on from that, Sarah, if you don't have policies in place, and as Sarah mentioned about who's doing the cross-checking, the separation and segregation of duties, if people are asking you, coming to you saying who's going to be checking this, or who does, if they've got questions that kind of delve beyond their role, so who's going to be doing the bank reconciliation, or what kind of, if they ask, do I need to provide receipts for everything, or what kind of checks, if they're really going deep into an area in terms of what the policy is without you having delivered the policy around this, that can be a really key indicator that people are already thinking that way. Hey, that might be someone who's really good in the management side of this and wanting to make sure there are the right policies and procedures in place. But if someone's asking or wanting to know what's going to be happening or who's going to be checking their work or who's going to be seeing various aspects of the business, you've got to ask yourself, why are they asking it? Might be for fantastic reasons, but another reason might be they wanted to know where are their gaps they have available.
Yeah, great answer. All right. What advice would you give to practice managers to watch out for as red flags on Medicare frauds within a practice system? I think the step number one red flags that Eliza talked about are all relevant for Medicare fraud as well as fraud on the practice accounts. So I can pop that slide up again if you think that would be helpful, because it does have a good list of which was a lot of information, but let me just put it up again. Oh, I've gone past it. Here we go. So people talking about financial stress and also the lifestyle, I think looking at what people are buying or holidays they're going on. Often Eliza and I were talking about this on Monday night or Tuesday night, but at the end of these sprees of fraud that people go through, there's often really nothing left. They do manage to spend it all on luxury items or travel. So if it's a lot of money, it's probably not going off their mortgage.
Exactly. Probably not being put away in a savings or a term deposit. There's other symptoms from it. You can, like we said, you see the spending habits can drive.
So that'd be an important red flag, I think. Let me put up our final steps and regular newsletter and regular webinars as well. So if you want to get in touch with more specific personal questions, you are very welcome to. You can book a chat through our online contact page. And the same for next year. So the ULegal one is there, the next year one is here. We're going to send out this webinar to you so you can watch it again if you got value and want to just refresh things. And you're also welcome to join our Facebook group if you aren't already in there. We'd love to have you in there. There's over 1,000 people in there already, and we'd love to see you asking these questions and keeping us posted on what you're experiencing and learning in your own business. Eliza, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. And everyone, thank you for coming and have a great rest of the day.